everyone, to the first episode of AltAccountant for 2019. I'm joined by my co-host Hector Garcia from Quick Bookkeeping. My name is Kirk Bowman from Art of Value. Hector, Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year, Kirk. How are you? How was end of the year for you and the beginning of the new one?
It was low key. After the holidays where we went and visited family, we just came back and chilled until the kids went back to school. So it was kind of a nice, calm ending to the year. But we have some news for the new year. Speaking of new, you want to let the cat out of the bag?
Sure. So Kirk started by saying it's the first episode of AltAccountant for 2019, which is technically our 44th or 45th episode for Art of Advisory podcast. Simply what we have done was we started this podcast a year ago, literally like the second week of January. We went live for the first time in 2018. And we were on a journey, and we knew that our journey was going to end in some sort of a program that would be a movement. We had an idea what it was going to be, but we really needed a podcast to develop our ideas. So back then, I had a podcast called The Advisor's Corner, and Kirk has an active podcast called The Art of Value, and we wanted to merge the two concepts of value pricing and advisory services for accountants, and Art of Advisory was born. But Art of Advisory was just a pseudonym for the podcast, and the name of our movement that we have developed already, this has been a year in the making, is called the AltAccountant movement. So I think it's only natural that we continue that momentum, and we rename our podcast AltAccountant. But the topics shouldn't change. You're gonna hear us say AltAccountant more often than you hear us say Art of Advisory. And at some point, we'll stop saying Art of Advisory. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Hector, I think you're gracious. Art of Advisory, I think we intended for that to be the permanent name, right? I mean, it was permanent in the sense we wrote on that for a year. But then as we created our flagship course and came up with a new name for it, we realized that we should really align the two brands. It really made no sense to have two different names. So I think this kind of leads into the topic for this segment, which is kind of new beginnings, new goals. Some people might say New Year's resolutions. I'm not big on the word resolution just because the typical thing is you set it and forget it. If you go in the gym on January 2nd, you see, where are all these people? I didn't know this many people were at the gym. And then by February 2nd, they're all gone. I'm not talking about that. I prefer the term goals. And so if you think about it, talking about our show, we had set a goal to start doing a weekly show, and it morphed over time. And I think we finally fallen into a rhythm and a flavor that works for us. It's easy for us to do. It's easy for us to be consistent, but we also realized we needed a new goal. And the new goal was, okay, now it's time to take all of this knowledge that we've been talking about and package it in a different way so that people can absorb it in a much smaller period of time frame and actually hit some new goals in their business and take their business to a new level. So I'm actually excited about AltAccountant. I would just update everybody on the status. We do have our first two groups formed, and we still have plenty of time to form a third. We'd love to see 3 groups. So if you're still interested, be sure and check us out. The website, altaccountant.com, altaccountant.com, and just click on the link for workshop, and that'll take you to the page where we'll answer all your questions. There's a video. But Hector, let's get into this idea of goals. So I suggested that probably a couple goals that people have personally at the beginning of the year. I mentioned one already is to lose weight. A lot of times tied to fitness. Another one people might have is to get up earlier or to go to bed earlier or less time on their phone. But what are some things business-wise that people might consider as new goals, particularly when we're in this mindset of a new year?
Sure. I mean, when we talk about a New Year's resolution, quote unquote, in the business world, people really often use a different name like budget, right? So we have a new budget, right? So with new budget comes earmarked money for different activities. most businesses apply their quote unquote New Year's resolution in terms of budget because most of their movement happens with actual cash expenditures. However, not all resolutions per se are cash expenditures. Like you said, spend more time on your phone or spend less time on your phone, more time on social media. That's not necessarily a cash expenditure per se. But a lot of times people say, look, we're going to spend more money in marketing, or we're going to spend less money in XYZ, or we're going to expand to a bigger office, or we're going to bring in a couple of new employees, or maybe we're going to buy new equipment and up our infrastructure, or we're going to offer a brand new service, or we're going to develop or innovate a new service around what we do, or maybe we rebrand, exactly what we're doing. So there's this New Year's resolution concept or New Year goals take shapes in many ways, shapes, or form. I think one of the just simple ways is first divide them between the ones that are a change in spending habits versus the ones that are just change in habits, period. And they have two different ways of looking at them, right? So when we look at a change that has to do with the spending habits, typically there's not that much personal commitment for change. You're just reshifting resources. So there may be a commitment to sacrifice, whatever you're moving the money from, if you're moving money from one place to the other. But for the most part, that is just a strategic movement. The second half of this is the one that requires behavioral change. And typically the New Year's goals that require behavioral change, that require the most discipline, those are the ones that go by the wayside by the next month. Like you said, like it's easy to enroll into the gym, in January and pay the $30 a month or $50 a month. Some people pay the whole year in advance just to just to galvanize that commitment. But what ends up happening is if they don't make that disciplinary mindset shift where they're going to do this new thing, this new endeavor, it usually by the next month, it becomes the flavor of the month and you forget about it. So one of the things that I believe, and when I meet with my clients very often in January, and they come to me with the ideas, look, this is what we're going to do for the new year. I have them write down a 12-month plan of what the actions look like throughout the entire year, and what does the process of verifying or keeping them accountable for that, like who's going to check the results, who's going to check the progress. Because I think that a lot of times January is a big month for new ideas, but it's also, by the time February comes in, is a big month for fall offs. So again, it's very easy to make a monetary shift in commitment in January, not so much the disciplinary one. And I think I'd like to talk mostly about that. How do you make those disciplinary changes?
I agree. I didn't even have budgetary monetary changes per se on the radar, although I think those are good. For example, a CEO friend of mine has a company, probably about 75, 100 people. And what he does is he just sets a date on the calendar once a quarter to go through, and he just goes through all the expenses looking for something to trim. And he says on average, he usually finds 2 to 3% that he can trim or save, sometimes a little more, but it's just something he's disciplined himself to do. But it's interesting that what has allowed him to meet that goal on a regular basis is that he set an appointment with himself, and he honors that just like it were a doctor's appointment. You literally can go to his calendar and you can see, oh, okay, the last Thursday of the second quarter at 1:00, I'm going to sit down with myself and I'm going to review the expenses and look for things to trim. Now, he likes to run a tight ship. In fact, that's just part of his personality. Not everybody needs to necessarily do it that often or do it over and over, but it's one of the ways that he runs his business, but it's using that idea of calendaring it. So I think when you set a goal, the first thing is schedule out how you're going to do that. You mentioned that you want to figure out, okay, what are the actions over the next 12 months that I need in order to hit that? One of the concepts that a couple of friends of mine have been working on is there's a book, and I'm probably going to butcher the name slightly, but it's something like a 12-week year. It's the idea of quit setting goals for 12 months, try setting goals for 12 weeks. In other words, let's instead of setting such big goals, because I think that's one of the challenges with the discipline is it's so big, it's so hard to hit. It is, if you've ever read the book, and I'm drawing a blank on it, I'll come back to it. But anywhere there's a book that talks about essentially our willpower is essentially like the rider on an elephant. If you've ever seen these videos from India or Africa where they're riding the top of the elephant, well, you have a willpower that allows you to guide that elephant. But at some point, the rider gets tired. The rider wears out that energy. And at that point, the elephant's going to do what the elephant wants to do. And so the idea that, if you're not taking as far a journey, meaning 12 weeks instead of 12 months, it makes that a little bit easier. So that's one thought, and kind of tied that to putting it on the calendar. What would you add?
Well, I love to respond to that. So 12-Week Year by Brian P. Moran. That's maybe the book you're looking at.
That is the one.
It says, get more done in 12 weeks than others do in 12 months. I didn't think about it like that. As an accountant, I'm used to building budgets, and budgets are typically done in a monthly basis and then annualized. That's kind of like how the accounting world works. And maybe my mind is just way too mired in the concept of, fiscal years and tax returns and stuff like that. But that is true. Like even you and I, we created the habit of building this podcast as a weekly habit. We literally went in and blocked each other's calendar for a whole hour each week. And we said, we're going to go live. We're going to block it in the calendar. That way there's no excuses in terms of, we'll record it later and we'll edit it later. I would say 95% of our episodes went out live. That means they weren't unedited and uncut really. A few of them were cut afterwards where they were posted into YouTube or into the podcast, but for the most part, we went live. And I believe that probably the only thing that allowed us to create the discipline was physically blocking that on the calendar. And that was a weekly habit, not a monthly habit. So now that's going to get me to rethink, even in my own strategy as an advisor. When my clients come to me and say, hey, I got this plan for change, I thought I was being, revolutionary by giving somebody a 12-month program, a 12-week program. And that's a lot harder to do. As accountants, most of the time, we really just reconcile the books in a monthly basis. I don't think so much in a weekly basis, but you're right. I think that if you're going back and double checking, monthly basis, it may lose its inertia. It may lose its energy. So I'm actually kind of with you that any change needs to be checked in a weekly basis. It needs to be almost like a weekly ritual. I mean, that's why religions do it this way. I mean, it can't be a coincidence that all religions have one weekly ritual. I mean, why is that? I mean, that there has to be a connection between why is it so important that once a week. I mean, I don't know what the cycle is, but I do think that the accountability process, when we check the progress and check how well we're doing, it needs to be done on a weekly basis. So that's something I just learned from you. I really like that.
What are some of the other things that a business owner might sit down and consider? And let me describe this category. I'm thinking about a bigger goal, like something somebody might think, I want to make this change this year. So for example, somebody might say, I want to drop 30 pounds and I want to keep it off, or I want to eat healthy, or I want to start working out 6 days a week, those kind of things. The first thing that I think of in that category is possibly somebody who has a business with a volume of clients that's in the hundreds. I would say something I would suggest would be to trim 10 to 20% of your clients. Might be one. Now that kind of falls in line with kind of our ideas of, value pricing and good positioning and innovating, but that's one that I might throw out there. You might say, why?
That's a good goal. That's a good goal, but that's not a common one though. I think it's a good goal. It's not a common one. Trimming a percentage of your clients is not the routine thing that I get from my customers up front. They don't come to me and say, hey, help me figure out who my low profitability clients are. It is not a common practice. And I got to tell you, when it does happen, it's also wrong to ask your accountant. I'll tell you why. Because I've done that exercise where I basically take, and look, I'm an accountant. So if somebody tells me, can you give me my 10% worst clients? What am I going to look at? Well, I'm going to look at the clients that you made the least money on, right? And then when we think about profitability, and we go back to like even your podcast with Dr. Reginald Lee, which is a whole other deep conversation on how we measure profitability. But I look at it in terms of, well, how long the projects took to complete and how much revenue you brought in, and then maybe somehow I'll figure out some sort of index of profitability. And then I come back to my client, to my customers, and say, hey, these are your worst 10%. And they'll look at the list and say, oh, not John, not Mary. There's a good guys. I can't get rid of them. So what ends up happening is when you take the financial perspective of who your worst clients is, and then you take that spiritual, that one that's hard to measure with numbers perspective of who your worst or best clients are, you're going to have a clash immediately. So I know we got sidetracked a little bit, but you prompted the whole concept of, trimming down your 10% or 5% worst clients. And when we say worst, accountants think of least profitable. But I know, Kirk, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about something else. But that is a good goal to have, not a very common one. If you want to respond to that, do it. If not, I can tell you another one.
Well, my response would simply be, I wasn't necessarily looking at it from the viewpoint of what you as an accountant might challenge your customers to do. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of what you as the accountant or bookkeeper would do in your own business. Because the model I've seen predominantly is accountants and bookkeepers that have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of customers. And part of what brings this to mind for me this time of year is because already I'm seeing, I think I saw on January 2nd, somebody who is a friend of mine on Facebook that's an accountant post something like, let tax season start, or something to that nature. And it really, me personally, it's really disturbing to me to see how tax season has such a negative impact on businesses and quality of life for so many of my friends in the industry. But that might be one thing that, somebody could be challenging, because to be honest, if you have hundreds of customers, let's say you have 500, okay, you're only talking about weaning 10% maybe. So you're getting rid of 50 and keeping 450. My guess is, you could go even further than that, but that's just kind of the context. So that would be the only comment I would add.
Yeah. So just to add on to the reason why that let the tax season begin comment comes along is because there's a domino effect between the New Year's resolutions of the small business clients into the resolutions of the accountants. And let me explain what I mean. Is in January, people say, this is the year that I will get organized. This is the year that I will get an accountant. This is the year that I'll stop procrastinating. This is the year that I'll do proper tax planning. This is the year that I'll add payroll. This is the year where I'll start amortizing my assets. This is the year that I want to be bankable. Whatever it is, small business owners get this small business mentality of getting clean, getting organized. And because of that, they tend to either challenge their current accountant's services, right? Or, and for that matter, seek out a new one, or get one because they didn't get one in the first place. So the domino effect of all these small business owners looking to get clean books from the get-go, thinking, it is now or never. If I let January go past and I don't start right from the get-go, it's going to be a mess just like last year. And that is a very, very common mindset of the small business owner. This is why we get an influx of new customers. So the let the tax season begin comment is not, it's not just, the busyness from my current client base. It's also the busyness from the new potential client base that comes along. So we not only get the regular work that we get all year long, we get all the end of the year closing, and then we get a brand new set of leads. So one of the resolutions that a lot of accountants have because of this is hiring a new employee. That actually is probably the most common challenge that all my colleagues have in January, because they know they'll have the money to pay one. Like if they never had it all year, they know they'll have it because they'll have an influx of new customers or new business or more revenue per se, at least compared to the rest of the year. and they know they'll have the work. What they don't have is the time to train them, the patience to train them, and they have the uncertainty that after tax season is over, can they keep them? So that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have in January. It's, the uncertainty of the new business coming along, the need for help to hire a new employee, and just the lack of patience and energy to train them. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that accountants and bookkeepers think about. The other thing that is very common, by the way, is this dichotomy that this year I will not do taxes anymore, or the other way, this year I will finally do taxes. This is such a common thing that happens to accountants and bookkeepers and colleagues of mine. This happens to me every single year. I renounce tax preparation every single year, and this is my 11th season doing tax returns, and I'm doing probably 20% more than I did last year. Every year I try to stop doing tax returns. I just never get around to figuring out how to stop doing it because our clients need it. And I've talked to other folks at conferences and friends of mine. They go through the same process of either start doing payroll or stop doing payroll, because payroll is like a whole nother monster, or some of them want to start doing tax returns. So I would say I threw a whole bunch of things out there, but that's the most common things that come across accountants and bookkeepers' minds in January.
So I think we've mentioned two, but if it's been more than that, I want to catch up. So the first one was the idea that I threw out of maybe it's time to trim your worst customers, and throughout that could be 10 to 20%. You added to that, well, with tax season, a lot of bookkeepers and accountants may be considering hiring an employee. So that might be a second one. A third one that you threw out, which is one of my favorites, and I think we have a future show to do on this, is the idea of I'm going to get out of the tax business, right? So there's three. Is there another one we've mentioned, or is there a fourth that we could add?
The fourth one, consequently, would be the other way. I'm going to get into the tax, finally get into the tax business. Believe it or not, a lot of people wait until they earn the skill set and they look forward to getting into the tax business because they're tired of seeing the other tax people get a chunk of the revenue that they could get, and the bookkeepers get with the clients that they've been doing the books forever. So that's a potential fourth one that may not be as common, but that is one that does happen.
So what are some other business goals that we might consider setting? For example, I would consider this a business goal because I think the number one thing that gets in the way of taking vacations is business, right? So a business goal, and it could be maybe a business/personal goal, would be to take a vacation, or it might be to take more regular vacations. So for example, if you took none last year, your goal this year would be to take one. If you took one last year, your goal this year might be to take 2 or 3. That would be another one. Another one that I can think of would be just to set work hours for yourself. I think one of the things that as entrepreneurs, we tend to just work ourselves in the ground. I've always said, yeah, I'm self-employed. I've got the worst boss in the world. It's myself, right? Because I think self-care tends to fall to the wayside. And so, having some set hours, just saying, look, I'm going to walk out of the office at 5 and I'm not going back in until, either the kids go to bed or ideally the next morning. That might be another. What are some other things you can think of? Just ideas in case people may be still figuring out what their goals are. What are some other candidates we might put on the list?
I'm with you on the vacation, by the way. It's been one of my, almost like you prompted me for it. When I was thinking about rebranding my business and my services around, what matters to my customers, I dug really deep and I basically drew a dotted line between my personal goals and my client goals. And I figured that what I really want is to take more vacations with my kids. And when I dug deep with my customers in terms of how often they go on vacations, this is actually one of the questions that happens in my value conversations all the time. We talk about this, and this is how I connect with my clients. And we're all about the same. We have the same issue, like you said. Work gets in the middle of vacations. So one of the things that we have done in order to force ourselves to do vacation is we buy the plane tickets way early in January. We reserve the hotel way early in January. We make it such as, and we do a non-refundable. So we make it in such a way that we have to plan around it. Like that's already been done. I think a lot of folks plan their vacations after tax season. And I think that if you wait until after tax season, you have way too much leg room. If you do it right before, your busy time, you like right now, we're planning to take this big trip to Canada. We want to drive around Canada. We're going to do Montreal, Toronto, Niagara Falls. We have this big trip with our family put together. We're making all the arrangements now, and we're finalizing everything now, because I know if we do it now, there's no way to back out. So that's kind of a big deal for me, and that's something that I'm also telling my customers about, because I want them to draw examples from what we do. A lot of our customers admire, my work and what I do, and they look up to, how I run my business, because they see me online, they see my videos, they see me, and they look for ideas, and they're like, hey, how do you run your business? They ask me for management advice and a relationship advice with their partners. Hey, how do you handle this with your partners? I have partners too. So you may want to look into the fact that customers really look forward to listening to your advice on how you do things, because they admire how you run your business if you run your business right. And vacations is one of those things that at least verbally, I try to make a big deal about. I haven't shown it to my family that we do I take as many vacations as I need to, but that's why it's incorporated into my goal. So I think both pre-planning your vacations and also pre-planning the time for yourself. Now, time for yourself could be time to think, and that's okay, by the way, because you can't innovate if you don't have time to reflect upon your learnings. Although most innovation happens in the heat of the challenging moments, because that's really when you're stressed out and you feel all the stress elevated and you're like, I got to do something about this. That's when you think there's got to be a better way. But it's only until you have time to reflect, think about what happened, and then think about all the potential ways you can do stuff, and time to, let's say, test and exercise and try different things is really when you start innovating. So schedule some time for yourself to reflect and innovate, and schedule some time just to create content and marketing, so you can take those reflections and turn them into a permanent knowledge base for the world to know, what you have learned along the way. So together with the vacation time, I would also add scheduling time for thinking and time for content writing or video making, or whichever way you can take thoughts from your head into permanent record.
I'm smiling at your idea of marketing, because in reality, a lot of solopreneurs, small practices don't market, right? At least not actively. And so that might be a good topic for a future show. In fact, as we've been talking, I've been starting to jot down ideas for some future episodes, but I think we've hit this one pretty good. So I just want to say, hey, if you have set some goals for 2019, congratulations. If you've not, consider some of the ones we've suggested, or maybe that'll provoke you to come up with your own. But either way, I want to encourage you. It's a fresh start. Take advantage of it, but don't be too hard on yourself. And definitely, I think it's important to take some time to read about how to do goals well, because the traditional way of doing them wears everybody out and nobody gets anything done. So, Hector, anything else you would add?
That's it. That's good. We have a new commitment in 2019 to keep the episodes to 30 minutes. So for Kirk and I, it's hard, but we are going to do it. So this is good timing for us, and then we'll see you next week.
All right, everybody. Take care.